is Sukaja. Welcome back to my booktube channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about a few of the books that I read in 2018. First off, Happy New Year to you all. I read a very number of books in different categories. Books about immigration, books that were set in different parts of Europe, short story books, and then poetry books, books that can't be categorized into any of these categories. So I've got all of them kept in little heaps here. 2018, I kickstarted my year by reading this book that was sent to me by Pushkin Press. Pushkin Press is known to publish a lot of translations, and this is called My Cat Yugoslavia by Pachtim Satovci. So I'm just going to read a part of the blurb. Yugoslavia, 1980s. A 16-year-old Muslim girl named Emin is married off to a man she hardly knows. But what was meant to be a happy match soon goes terribly wrong, and her country is torn apart by war, and she flees with her family. So Emin goes to a different country. She goes to Finland. So this book is set in Finland and Yugoslavia. She gives birth to a son who turns out to be gay. It's actually an exploration of his character and his identity, and it talks a lot about what forms identity, what are the components, when do we get our identities, and it answers those kinds of questions. So if you're interested in reading about identity, then I would recommend this book. I read Behold the Dreamers. This is by Mbolo Mbui. Oprah's book club also recommended it. So it's definitely worth reading. It's set in New York in 2007, and it has a couple at the center of it. They've just immigrated to America, and it's about how they have to start their lives there. He has to find a job and everything from scratch, and things are really hard financially, and it also deals with part of the 2007 depression when Obama had just come to power. The man is from Cameroon, actually. A bit of the blurb now. New York, 2007. After 2 long years apart, Jendi Jonga has brought his wife Neni from Cameroon to join him in the land of opportunity. Drawn by the promise of America, they're seeking the chance of a better life for them and their son. But tugs at your emotional heartstrings because you really feel for this family. You really want what's best for them. And the next book I read was Americana. I rated it 4 out of 5 stars, and it deals with a woman's journey of migration, her experience as an immigrant in America. And the next book I read about immigration was Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. I had heard so much about this book, and I really had very high expectations of it. I liked it, but then I'm not someone who really enjoys magic realism. And I really like the fact that it talks about shifting borders, and it talks about a world that exists without any borders. So can you imagine if you could just walk through a door and you could find yourself in a different part of the world just like that? Wouldn't it be much easier for you to travel around? This book is great for a book club discussion. It also talks about the East and the West and about a world without that binary. So it's really interesting, and I would definitely urge everyone to read this. But it does deal with the love story at the center of it, but it also deals with the questions of borders and immigration. It brought to mind the idea of imagined communities. When I was reading this book, I had a lot of theory going on in my head. So yeah, the next set of books I'm going to talk about are books that I read about the body this year. And this is The Dumb House. This is a book about a man who likes to experiment on his own children. So it's really eerie, it's really morbid. Read it if you like reading about medical science and the body and things like that. So as a child, Luke's mother often tells him the story of the dumb house, an experiment on newborn babies raised in silence, designed to test the innateness of language. As Luke grows up, he likes to do a lot of experiments in his own garage. So it's really creepy, and the protagonist brought to mind Lolita. I felt that there was some connection there. But read it if you like morbid things. The next book that I read, Poor Things by Alasdair. I found out about this book on Jen Campbell's channel. It's really hard to find this book, so I urge you to buy a secondhand copy if that's available, probably on Amazon. I just think that it's really worth reading because there are beautiful illustrations inside, and if you're someone who likes Frankenstein, Lolita, and Victorian literature, then you will love Poor Things by Alasdair. It's about a man who brings to life a woman by transplanting a brain of a baby, the baby that was inside her when she died. And it has an unreliable narrator at the start of it, so you really can't believe all of what he says. You really have to question things as you read along. So it's really interesting, and I think you should pick it up. Next off, The Silent Companions. It's got a gorgeous cover, and the book is as exciting as the cover is. And I had a nightmare or two after I read this book. It will stay with you long after you finished reading. I wasn't very happy with the end, and it's because of the end that I didn't rate this book as highly as I would have liked. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It's really eerie and atmospheric, and you feel like you're actually there witnessing all the scary things that are happening in this mansion. It's the end. You might want to just give this a shot. But yeah, if you're someone who really doesn't care about the way things end and you're more focused on the journey, then read this book. Books on Europe. I had this hashtag because I was visiting Europe in April 2018. So I decided that we have to read some books about Europe before we go there, me and my friend. So we decided to read The Wonder by Donaghue, which is set in Ireland. This book is historic fiction. It talks about a girl who likes to fast and believes in fasting. She's part of an Irish Catholic family, so she might have religious reasons for doing so. And one day, a woman comes to her house and they develop this really strong friendship. And it's also based on maternal frameworks. Once the woman comes into her life, she somehow tries to intervene and see if she can take things into her own hands, and that's when things start to get serious. So read this book if you're into that kind of stuff. The next book I read was The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. It's set in Amsterdam in the 16th century. Jessie Burton has a real flair for writing atmospheric novels. It takes you to a different part of the world when you start reading it. You actually feel like you're there. A doll's house is basically a miniature version of the mansion in which Amsterdam people used to live in. Every rich family would have a doll's house, and the mistress of the house is sort of threatened by the fact that a lot of mysterious things are starting to happen after the doll's house came into the house. It's historic fiction all the way, and it's set in Amsterdam, so read it if you're going to visit Europe because you won't be sorry. The next book I read was Ernest Hemingway's A Moveable Feast. It has some beautiful sentences, and I really appreciated this book in terms of stylistic aspects. The short sentences and the references to other literary figures such as Ezra Pound and, James Joyce and everyone else who was in Paris during the time. It talks about Ernest Hemingway's experiences living in Paris. He describes surroundings of the city and some of its major landmarks in really endearing terms. So read this little book if that is something you're interested in. It's a timeless classic and it'll always be in every Parisian's heart. A must read, actually. Next book I read was The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. It's about a woman during the late Victorian era. She's a naturalist herself and she loves pursuing knowledge. She's not really feminine. She doesn't really comply with all the rules of femininity and everything, and she does things very differently. She is at the center of this novel, a very inspiring female protagonist. So for that, you should read this. 2 poetry books, one of which is Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. I found the writing to be a bit pretentious, so I didn't enjoy it as much. Like, all the poems felt like maybe she had written them on a bad day in college. I know this might sound really, really bad to hear, but somehow I didn't find a lot of depth in her poetry. It didn't feel like something extraordinary. So I'm hoping that The Sun and Her Flowers might be much more interesting. Keep my fingers crossed on that. Smoke and Mirrors by Michel Faudet. This is another poetry collection. Michel Faudet is a mysterious figure. You barely get to see his face if you Google him. But the poetry in this was much more promising than the poetry I read in Rupi Kaur's book. Read it if you want an insight on modern romance, contemporary age and romantic encounters that happen. The next book that I read was Britt Murray Was Here. I have spoken about this in another video on my channel. It's just a book about a woman who doesn't have the social skills required to thrive. It doesn't really have much of a plot, so if you're not someone who likes a book which is only character centric, then don't pick it up because you might not enjoy it. It's very lighthearted and it's a quick read. It's good for if you want to go on vacation and you don't want to read anything serious or heavy, then I would recommend this. Wonder by RJ Palacio. So I heard a lot about this book, and the reason I wanted to read it is because it deals with disfigurement, and that is a theme that I would like to explore further in my reading. Wonder is a book about August, who is this child born with a gene which causes his face to be disfigured at birth. So he doesn't look like the average kid. This is a book about his experiences going to school and being around people who look like you and me. So what's his innocent perspective on being the way he is, and how does he deal with that as a kid and then as a teenager? That's what this book is about. It's a very personal read and it tugs at your heartstrings. If literature is something that develops empathy in you, then this is one of those books that will help do just that. Also watch the movie if you can. Next, Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch. Last year I read The Secret History and absolutely loved it. So I decided to read The Goldfinch, and I love her style of writing. She is actually one of my favorite authors right now. I'm just going to read the back of the book. At age 13, Theodore Decker, son of a devoted mother and an absent father, miraculously survives a catastrophe that otherwise tears his life apart. So there's a bomb blast in New York City and he loses his mother. This is Theodore Decker's journey from New York to Las Vegas and how he ends up losing himself in the process when he loses his mother, and how he finally decides to find himself. Through what means does he find himself? So there's a lot of references to drugs, and the kid goes through a really tough time, but in the end he just comes out fine. And that's what it's all about. So what would you do if one day you've lost both your parents and social services come knocking on your door? What would you do? That's what this book deals with. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the play that I read this year. I just want to take this moment to give a quick shout out to Donaghue Books because they have been religiously sending me books. These are publishers who really do excellent work in regional literature and also Indian literature. So big shout out to Tisha Donaghue and Donaghue Books in Delhi. You should check them out on Instagram, Quality Regional Literature. Chitra is a play in one act by Rabindranath Tagore. And this is a really short read, a quick read, and I read it in a day. It's a well-written, well-presented play. It's short and crisp. I'm not going to speak much about this. You might want to find it on Goodreads and read about it. The next book I read was Dear Ijeawele, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions. So Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has written this letter to one of her friends who recently gave birth. She's written very straightforward and she doesn't sermonize. She gives out the advice as though it's advice that she's learned by living. These are things that women might want to read and men might want to read, and anyone who's a feminist might want to read, because it tells you clearly what feminism is all about and what it's not. So I think this is really important and very timely. The next book is I Am by Maggie O Farrell. This is a 5-star read for me. Just put that there. I really like this because it deals with death, and I've always been interested in books and writing about death. This deals with 17 instances that Maggie O Farrell came very close to death, what her experience has been of encountering death so very close. So she talks about that in detail. The next book I'm going to talk about is Educated by Tara Westover. This is again a 5-star read of the year. It is by far an outstanding work for a debut author. This is a memoir, and it's about not being documented by authorities, not having a birth certificate until the age of 12, and living in Idaho in the middle of nowhere and having no access to proper education, to having parents who believed in Mormonism's end of the world ideology, and they tried to impose that on you. So you started believing that the world was going to end and you had to pack supplies. Tara Westover eventually gets to go and earn a degree from Cambridge University. But the most important is the journey and how she makes it there. So this is an empowering read, and I would totally urge everyone to read it. The next 3 books are the short story collections. I read Blind Willow Sleeping Woman. The stories in this book are a great idea if you want to get introduced to Murakami's writing style. If you've never read Murakami, then I urge you to begin with this book. Stories are really simple, but they're also very immersive. They have his very meditative sort of style. You also get to go into a different world when you read them. The stories will have you thinking about them much long after you've kept it aside. The stories will still come back, and there will be stories that pose riddles that you will want to figure out the answers to and stuff. The next book I read is another Murakami. It's After the Quake. You do have to cultivate a taste for Murakami, so I would recommend that you read his short stories first, and this is the good read if you want to pick it up. After the Quake is about the Kobe earthquake. All the stories center on the earthquake. The thing about Murakami is he doesn't talk about the earthquake immediately. It's just there. He inserts it in all these stories in different places. So it's nice that he's written with this theme. It talks about average, ordinary individuals, people who are just going about their daily lives, who are somehow in some way affected by the earthquake, whether they see it in their dreams or they are directly there in the place where it happens. So yeah, I definitely recommend Murakami. The next thing I read was Adichie's The Thing Around Your Neck. So I've spoken about this as well in a different video. The characters in this book discuss storytelling and different themes. They have different stories about women, there are stories about ghosts, a lot of different interesting reads. You don't have to read in any order, you can enjoy it either ways. This brings my video to an end. But before I close things, I want to say that the last book I read for this year was also a 5-star read. I read When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr. So I love books about world wars, stories about German Jewish people who escaped the Holocaust and things like that. So this is just one of those stories. Judith Kerr writes about her memories living a very difficult time in 1933 when Hitler's political party was about to come to power. Her family, they ran away. They went to different parts of Europe seeking refuge, a fresh start in life. She finds herself living in Paris and then finally in England, and lives in Switzerland for some time. It's written in a reader-friendly manner, and it's good for children as well if you want to read it out. I would definitely recommend When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit because it's not an average read. It's something that really digs into a person's experience, a person who's lived through an interesting life. So give it a read. Let me know if you've read any of these 23 books that I've spoken about. Thanks for staying till all the way because you've heard about the bonus book. I will be back soon with more videos. I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe to my channel and please like this video if you liked the content. I will see you very soon. Lots of bookish love. Bye.